Thank you for joining us for the 6th international webinar organized by Faculty of Economics, Business and Tourism, University of Split, and supported by Croatian Section of European Regional Science Association. Being developed in response to the changing needs, this webinar should represent an essential guide to understanding the key facts and offer a chance to ask questions, learn what others are doing, and gain advice on how to make the best decision for our local and regional community. Keeping in mind our goals, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Shinan Wang and Ryan Weber from Nordregio, leading international research center for regional development and planning among Nordic countries. Shinan is specialized in GIS and cartography, data management, and spatial analysis. She has participated in 3 Horizon 2020 projects, which covered the topics like social justice, territorial cohesion, impact of climate change, and stakeholder engagement, urban agriculture, and international knowledge transfer. Ryan research focus is on land use, service distribution, infrastructure and planning strategy in Nordic and European cities. He leads 2 international research and collaboration projects, Social Green and Regina, which focus on green building and local smart specialization. He also works with urban planners to develop tools that support sustainable urban development initiatives by local and regional governments. Before we start, few technical and organizational tips. We will start with a 20 minutes presentation by Shinan under the title The Segregated City and Nordic Overview, and immediately after, Ryan will have additional 20 minutes to discuss the opportunities and challenges associated with the green affordable housing, including tangible planning and policy actions by local and regional governments, as well as financial incentives and behavioral change by households. After both presentations, we will have up to 30 minutes for question and answer session. Please, just to be on safe side, mute microphone during the presentation. In your left corner, you have icon for that, so that we can have smooth link with our speakers. After the presentation, you'll be kindly asked to turn on your microphone and start with your questions and discussions. Thank you. And Shinan, the stage is yours.
Okay, good afternoon all, and thank you for introducing us, Finko. And it's my pleasure to share our Nordic experience with you Croatian colleagues. So I will start my presentation by sharing my screen. Can you see the slides? Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yes, my name is Shinan and I work as a GIS analyst at Nordregio. I will first give a few words about our organization. So as Finko just said, it is a leading Nordic and European research institution within the broad research fields of urban and regional development studies. It was established in 1997 by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and we provide knowledge that enhances Nordic cooperation and strengthens the Nordic countries in a global context. We are situated in a beautiful island in central Stockholm and have 47 staff members from 18 countries. Yes, so today I will present an overview report that Nordregio did 2 years ago about segregation in the Nordic cities. So I will get it started. The Nordic countries are similar in many respects. They are remote, sparsely populated welfare states that contain small and medium-sized cities. There are also similarities with respect to patterns of urban segregation. Results from a range of studies indicate that urban segregation is increasing in the Nordics, which hinders public service efficacy, economic growth, and social sustainability. The trend of increasing social segregation challenges ideas of equality and justice that are often associated with the Nordic region. It also presents Nordic urban planners with a complex task to navigate the different needs and desires of an increasingly diverse and dynamic population. According to one of the overviews of the segregation in the Nordic countries, ethnic residential segregation is a notable feature of all larger Swedish cities. And Sweden as a country is positive towards immigrants, but there are difficulties for new immigrants in finding housing and employment. It also highlights the increasing segmentation in the Danish housing market over the past 30 years, where income levels and tenure forms correlate. In Norway, there is an ethnic divide in economic and social integration patterns. Finally, Finland is a slightly different case because it is only in recent years that immigration has increased. However, this increase has coincided with the economic recession, resulting in growing social differentiation, the aging of the population, and increasing ethnic diversity. So what does the statistics say? We will present some statistics on ethnic and economic segregation on district level in 4 capital cities, excluding Reykjavik in Iceland due to lack of data. The purpose here is to show the spatial divisions between socioeconomic groups, as well as the strong correlations between personal income and foreign background population. They are also an indication that segregation is a multi-dimensional issue. So we start with Stockholm. So the first 2 maps illustrate the change in the share of population with foreign background to the left, and the change in average income in Stockholm to the right on a district level. The charts below displays the evolution over time of the districts with the highest and lowest share of foreign-born population, as well to the left, as well as the wealthiest and poorest districts on the right. So the bluish shading represents the increase over a decade, with darker colors showing darker increase and vice versa. In general, all the districts in Stockholm witnessed an increase in share of population of with foreign background and an increase in average income. However, there is a significant difference in rate of change, especially for average income. Average income increased most in the districts with high income levels, which implies an increase in the gap between well-off and socio-economically deprived districts, and that the absolute differences between districts are growing. You can see clearly from the chart to the right corner here that the income gap between the wealthiest districts and the poorest districts has been growing in Stockholm from 2005 to 2015, and the wealthiest districts are Östermalm, which are showing the red line, which are displayed as red line here, and the poorest district is Rinkeby-Kista, displayed as blue line here. So the poorest district in Stockholm municipality, Rinkeby-Kista, contains the highest proportion of residents with a foreign background, because if we look at the chart to the left, Rinkeby-Kista is the top on the chart with the highest share of population with foreign background. In contrast, the municipality's wealthiest districts like Östermalm, Södermalm, accommodate a high proportion of native-born Swedes, making them as very low on the chart to the left. So we have done similar analysis for Copenhagen, Oslo, and Helsinki. I won't go into any detail here, but I can conclude from the statistics that it is clear that the residential segregation among both ethnic and socioeconomic lines is a significant challenge in the Nordic capital cities. Although each city has its difference, there are remarkable similarities in segregation patterns. More alarmingly, these residential segregation patterns have grown more intense over the past decade. In other words, it's more difficult for. In other words, social mobility appears to be decreasing. Yes. So with these trends of spatial isolation in the Nordic capital cities established, we will then explore one of the key features and variables of segregation, housing policy. Housing accessibility is of critical importance to urban integration. How does one enter the housing market as a newly arrived resident in a city in the Nordic countries? The answer to this is the key to understanding segregation patterns. We use public housing as a generic term for rental for public-owned housing, rental housing, and social housing as a more specific term that describes subsidized rental housing. The public housing companies and other actors on the housing market are the key actors in the integration process. They have both local knowledge and local authority and can therefore influence the development in a neighborhood to a high degree. For example, the possibility of newly arrived migrants establishing themselves in the housing market in Sweden would be jeopardized if the public housing companies had strict demands on income or permanent employment request. Despite having broadly similar welfare states, housing policies throughout the Nordic countries is complex and varied. The table summarizes the tenure forms in the Nordic countries. We can see that Finland has more tenure forms than the other countries. These forms mix ownership and rental in different ways. In addition, it is clear that social housing does not exist explicitly in Sweden, while in Denmark and Norway, the terms social housing and public housing refer to the same types of rent-subsidized dwellings. The issue of who acts as landlord can also be important because it indicates the relevant actors in the housing market who can influence the accessibility or create barriers. In Norway, private individuals are significant landlords. In Sweden, the municipal housing companies are key actors. So the public housing in Sweden is municipal housing. Whereas in Denmark and Finland, unions or even non-profit organizations can act as public housing landlords. So in relation to housing policy, a strong theme on Nordic segregation is market segmentation. Market segmentation occurs when different tenures are made available and attractive for different households. For example, divide by income and family situation. While low-income groups tend to cluster in public housing, high-income groups tend to cluster in owner-occupied housing. This tenure segmentation often results in the spatial segregation of immigrants. The policy response to market segmentation is often some kind of social mix policy, for example, the mixing of tenure forms in housing. In almost all cases, public rental housing correlates strongly with low-income population in the major Nordic cities. Norway and Finland have subsidized social housing that is explicitly needs-tested and built for low-income groups. In contrast, Denmark and Sweden have aimed for a more universalist housing model, providing equal access to both publicly and privately owned housing, although there are complications in practice. So in all of the Nordic capital cities, residential segregation has worsened over the past decade. it is clear from the research that the housing shortages, inequitable service and job distribution, and discrimination or racism towards those of a foreign background have all strongly contributed to segregation and inequality in Stockholm, Copenhagen, Oslo, and Helsinki. Although only a relatively small degree of attention has been given to Reykjavik regarding urban inequality, the city is also beginning to show patterns of segregation and spatial isolation among its minority groups. While each country has some unique characteristics, there are still more similarities than differences in the Nordic countries. So the overview report has mentioned several ways to understand segregation in the Nordic cities, and it has also pointed to specific areas where work needs to be done and already is being done. They concern housing policy, where it is necessary to lower the barriers on the housing market and increase the access to affordable housing. They concern local urban planning that can contribute the creation of community spaces that reduce the effects of physical, economic, cultural, or social barriers between individuals and ethnic groups. And finally, they concern problems of discrimination of people and stigmatization of places, which must be approached from the city or the society as a whole through legal structures, policies, and long-term urban planning. So I think that's all from my side. And here is the link to the publication if you like to read. And I will hand it over to my colleague, Ryan.
Yes, thanks, Shinan. I think that you gave an overview to the types of analysis or evidence base that can be included in the development of a local or regional development strategy as evidence and then recommendations to be included in these types of strategies that you are all working with to develop in Split. And with that being said, I want to take that discussion a little bit further to specifically deal with the housing sector and dealing with societal challenges, much in the way that Shinan explained, but within this context of including it within a type of development strategy that you're working to develop. So I have a few assumptions or objectives here that I want to get across. And I mean, one of the assumptions is that the issues of the housing sector and of housing policy are important for the development of your strategy, that the issues of energy issues and green energy transitions in the housing sector could be an important part of your strategy, and that in broadly speaking terms, societal challenges and differences in equity and income among the society and the challenges associated with that are also key components that you want to address in the strategy. So I also assume or want to bring out in this project that there is an importance of linking these things together, and I want to show today how we link together societal issues related to housing with environmental issues related to a green energy transition. I want to explain how we can come up with ways of utilizing existing public funding, especially European funding, to help carry out different sorts of measures, including those that could be included in your development strategy. Also, the importance of including stakeholders and developing a stakeholder network as a part of the development and implementation of these strategies. And then also highlight some specific solutions that we have developed specifically within the context of the Social Green Project, with which Nordregio is a lead partner. So in terms of the Social Green Project, it's really about linking the issue of social housing and the issue of a green transition from an energy perspective together. So this means that we see housing as social spaces, as one of, if not the most important social spaces that we have in our society, but at the same time, we see them as centers of energy consumption. It also means that we see housing at a global scale in terms of the impact of the housing sector on energy consumption. In Europe, the housing sector is responsible for just over 40% of total energy consumption, but that we also see it at the local scale as areas where energy solutions can be implemented, and where questions of societal questions of equity and fairness and distribution of housing and associated policy is developed. So I want to talk a little bit about, to introduce what we mean when we're talking about greening buildings, especially in a European perspective, what we mean when we're discussing social housing and public housing, some brief words on the aspects of territorial specificity or differences between territories that impact different solutions, and then a pathway here for how we can develop policies and solutions that could be implemented in these types of development strategies you're working with. So first of all, this is just an overview from a European perspective, breaking down 3 macro regions in Europe. And what it shows is that in all 3 of these macro regions, where you would fit into the southern group, it shows that at least 37% of the building stock, the housing stock, is older than is 60 years or older. And in addition to that, it shows that 86% of the housing stock it comes from at least before 1990, when we started, at a period when we started to develop and implement different forms of green building throughout Europe. So this is a key diagram, and it shows, if we transpose this against the goals that we have from a European perspective, we know that if we want to meet our energy efficiency goals in Europe for 2030, 2040, and in particular 2050, that we're going to have to retrofit approximately 80 or 85% of the buildings that that 85% of the buildings that are currently constructed will still be standing in 2050 when we have to achieve these goals. And out of those 85% of the buildings, 97 or 98% of those buildings will need to be retrofit in order to meet those goals. So this just kind of describes the scale of the challenge that we have in front of us in order to meet our overall energy efficiency goals through interventions in the housing sector. So currently we're retrofitting approximately 1% of buildings in Europe. And under a 40% energy savings scenario already for 2030, we would have to increase, already up until now to 2020, we would have to increase the rate of retrofit 65% to reach this level of 1.65% per year. And if we want to meet our goals already starting from now going forward to 2030, we will have to retrofit over 240% more, or at a pace of 240% more than we're currently retrofitting, about 1% a year, in order to meet our goals. So in terms of greening the housing stock and making buildings green, this shows that we know what we have to do to achieve our goals, but we also know that we're not doing nearly enough at this point in time. So the Social Green Project is really about identifying, developing, testing, and implementing solutions to help elevate status and rate at which we're retrofitting our buildings so that we can meet our overall policy goals. A question about what social housing is. We've defined social housing in our project as housing and associated housing policy that explicitly serves the needs of low-income and vulnerable residents. Social housing is often built, owned, and/or managed by the public sector, but it also includes privately owned rental housing and different forms of housing cooperatives. We have this long and convoluted definition because when we try to define social housing in a European perspective, we see that there is just so many different constellations of the housing sector in which they are arranged between privately owned homes, between publicly owned homes, between subsidies for rental, between the most explicit forms of public homes for social housing. I mean, one example of this is just looking at the differences between Croatia and Sweden. You can see in the far right column here, this is the share of housing that is rented, and that there is a reduced price in the rent compared to the market value in order to achieve some sort of social welfare goal. You can see that percent is 7.7% in Croatia compared to 41.3% where there's rental housing at the market value. And if you look in Sweden, we have over 60% of our housing stock is rented to individuals, but it is at a below market level. So this just gives an example of the huge variety and different characteristics of the housing sector. And this becomes important on a European level when coming up with definitions and things like that, but it also comes up and to be very important at a local level when you're developing strategies, to have this clear understanding of the ownership distribution of housing, the current mechanisms that are in place to support society in whether it's covering energy costs or paying for rent as a whole. So it's very important to have this detailed understanding of what the conditions are at your local level. Another thing that we have specifically addressed in the project is this issue of territory and how much it matters in terms of the development of solutions. For instance, in lots of southern regions, not surprisingly, we're dealing with questions of energy reduction relating to cooling of buildings during the summertime, or the installation of solar panels and different forms of renewable energy systems. Whereas in the north, the question is much more about situations of insulation in order to keep buildings warm without relying on excessive energy from the grid, and or other forms of renewable energy development. So it's very important to keep this in mind and to look around to other regions in your country or other countries within your same sort of territory to identify the types of solutions or measures for the housing sector that could be the most relevant. Yes, so in terms of policy pathways or solutions, I just want to give an introduction to different sorts of solutions and alternatives and perspectives that are going to be really important for meeting over European goals overall, but in particular, how those could be translated into solutions that could be implemented for municipalities like Split or different regions or in national context. This is an example of the CREDEX grant scheme that one of our partners in Estonia has developed over the past 10 years or so. And it has become a hugely popular scheme whereby they will pay through the scheme. It is possible to get up to 40% of the retrofit costs for buildings covered by the grant under this scheme. Then for the remainder of the cost, they have set up preferential loan conditions and mortgage agreements with banks in Estonia so that there is it's much easier for the tenants who might be low-income tenants to receive the additional funding to cover the cost of these retrofits. So they're able to retrofit an apartment block like this and achieve upwards of a 60% reduction in total energy consumption in the building, simply by making interventions such as adding double or triple glazed windows, adding insulation to the exterior of the building, changing the oil boilers to heat exchange pumps, adding solar production on the roof. These types of solutions that are already very much technically available to the market and are easily accessible in the construction market in Estonia, and then have these types of significant benefits on energy. And the key here is that through the grant scheme, it makes it possible. There's a lot of background noise, so I would ask someone that might not have their microphone muted to please mute your microphone. So the point is that this building, this housing association in this building, is able to carry out this retrofit project with virtually no additional costs to their monthly payment for rent and for energy taken together, in addition to obviously adding to the value of their property and of their building. So this is one example that we have profiled in our project and is being carried forward in Estonia, and I think they've retrofit now over 700 buildings, apartment buildings, in Estonia using this scheme. So if we think about the policy pathway going forward, on a global level, the Buildings Performance Institute of Europe has suggested that in order to meet our global energy goals, we will have to spend over 100 billion euros per year in order to retrofit our buildings to meet our energy goals. This is a significant investment, to say the least. What we see in terms of the current implementation of funding available from Europe, from the European Social Fund, from the Regional Development Fund, that is specifically earmarked for energy related investments, is that a vast majority of those investments are going towards supply side infrastructure, whether it's the energy grid and energy distribution and energy production. And there is so little investment going towards demand side infrastructure. We are hoping that in the next budget starting in 2021, that there will be mechanisms to start to even this out. And this will hopefully create the conditions under which buildings and building infrastructure can get a significantly bigger piece of the pie in terms of funding these types of projects. In order to reach that total of, say, 100 billion per year, we need to utilize public funds that are available from the national government or from the European Union. But we also have to not only utilize that money in grants, like the example I gave in Estonia, we have to create leveraging of this money. We have to make this money do more work for us. And there are a number of ways of doing this. There is a zero interest eco loan program that was developed in France. And so the idea is that they were giving out interest-free loans for any retro energy renovation works that were being done. And what this meant is that by giving interest-free loans, they can inspire the retrofit of people's homes and their buildings without increasing their overall building costs. And then they can utilize this as a revolving fund. And what we see then is that €1 of public funding translates into 12 euros of private investment. A similar sort of scheme in the Netherlands gave a preferential interest rate offered to green investors. And the Building Performance of Europe measured that through that policy mechanism, €1 of public funding amounted to 83 euros of private investment. If we compare that to the CredEx scheme, because it is a grant scheme where you're simply giving money, public money, over to the private sector, to housing associations, €1 of public funding translated into less than 2.5 euros of private investment. So the key in terms of developing the amount of funds that are necessary to reach our goals is that we increasingly create policy mechanisms that can respond through leveraging and to make better use of each dollar that we have of public funds. One example of this is the development of energy service contracts and different types of revolving fund schemes. And together with our colleagues in Croatia from Regional Energy Agency of the North in Koprivnica, we're currently working on a Horizon project proposal where we are going to be developing these energy service contracts. And I think that this is something that you should really look into in the local context of Split as well. You have in Croatia now what's called an energy efficiency obligation scheme, like almost all other countries in Europe. And what this means is that the utility companies are responsible for making investments and reporting energy savings in order to meet the Energy Efficiency Directive of Europe. So you have the overarching Energy Efficiency Directive of Europe. Within that, on a national perspective, you have the energy efficiency obligation schemes, and the responsibility is placed on the utility companies themselves to develop measures and implement measures that can reduce the overall consumption. So what's possible here is to set up what are called these ESCOs, or energy service contracts, where these utility companies then invest in these retrofit projects. They receive the money from the energy savings, and at the end of the payback period, there is available resources, the end of the payback period, the intervention that has been made goes back to the ownership of the house or the housing association that owns the property. So these are the types of mechanisms that we need to increasingly put in place, and in fact, we have to put into place under the energy efficiency obligation scheme. So these are the types of solutions or solution spaces that can be considered for development in a looking to develop now. As I mentioned, yes, we need improved coherence and consistency in future European policy. And I mentioned this increased share of the money going towards the demand side sector. There is rumor, and perhaps buildings will be considered as critical infrastructure in the next programming period in European budget. And this could potentially make a significant impact on the amount of money from national or regional operational programs, public funds that would then be available for the development of the types of policy mechanisms that I'm talking about. So that is one sort of promising aspect that we could look forward to in the coming years, which immediately falls during the implementation period of the development plan that you're speaking about. So the Social Green Project, I've kind of vaguely introduced it. The key is that we have 7 regional partners from throughout Europe. Each of those are responsible for working together to build a local stakeholder group. With that local stakeholder group, which I understand that you have in some respects developed a similar stakeholder group for the development of your development strategy. Within that stakeholder group, they have each carried out a local assessment of the situation in relation to green building transition and the social housing sector to identify specific actions that they would like to carry out in their action plan, which is again directly connected to accessing and better utilizing these regional operational program funds. So key mechanisms in this process has been the formation of the stakeholder network, working together, doing a SWOT analysis to identify the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities, and in particular the threats and how those relate to each other, and then developing these concrete actions that they're now in the implementation process of. So I have asked my colleague Petra from Regional Energy Agency of the North to join us today, and she is just going to give you an overview of the action plan that they have developed in Koprivnica regarding the Social Green project and the types of things that they're working with in a Croatian context. So I will hand over the screen or ask you to share your screen, Petra, and you can maybe say a few words about the action plan that you've been developing.
Yep, no problem, Ryan. Thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar, so I can show to people what the Croatia has been doing in the social housing sector. We actually agreed that I will present in Croatian, but the presentation will be in English so that everyone can follow me. You can see it now? It's okay? Okay. So I'll switch now to my Croatian. Lijep pozdrav svima i još jednom se zahvaljujem na pozivu. Kao što je Ran spomenuo, dakle i Regionalna energetska agencija Sjever iz Koprivnice je jedan od partnera na projektu Social Green, te smo na projektu među ostalima izradili i akcijski plan kojega ću sada spomenuti, odnosno mjere koje su sadržane u tom akcijskom planu. Prije svega bih vam voljela samo ukratko prezentirati, odnosno objasniti pojmove affordable housing i social housing, odnosno priušljivo stanovanje i socijalno stanovanje u Hrvatskoj, način kako ga ajmo reći, mi definiramo. Onda ću vam prikazati, dakle, 3 mjere koje su proizašle iz projekta Social Green, odnosno iz našeg akcijskog plana, te na kraju samo dati jedan generalan zaključak vezano za cjelokupno socijalno stanovanje u Hrvatskoj. Dakle, što se tiče i socijalnog stanovanja i priuštivog stanovanja u Hrvatskoj, kao što je situacija u nordijskim zemljama, nekakve točne definicije i zakonske definicije nema, te su u stvari gradovi, općine, odnosno lokalne zajednice osuđene same definirati socijalno stanovanje onako kako najbolje znaju. Kao što je spomenuto, dakle, i u onoj jednoj podužoj definiciji socijalnog stanovanja koju smo ustanovili na Social Green projektu, lokalne vlasti su najčešće vlasnici tih zgrada, te oni sami sebi definiraju kriterije ko može dobiti, odnosno ko može biti stanar u socijalnim stanovima. Najčešće se to odnosi na najranjivije skupine društva, kao što su, na primjer, imigranti, stranci ili ljudi koji primaju zajamčenu minimalnu naknadu. Međutim, tu mogu biti i različiti drugi kriteriji poput broja članova obitelji, broja djece u obitelji, postotak invaliditeta jednog od članova obitelji, da li je neki član obitelji bio hrvatski branitelj. Zatim je, recimo, situacija u Zagrebu konkretno da ukoliko neko želi biti, dakle želi ući u socijalan stan, mora imati prebivalište u Zagrebu minimalno 10 godina, tako da je u stvari to jedan od kriterija. Dok, za razliku od socijalnog stanovanja, imamo priušljivo stanovanje. Mi u Hrvatskoj ne koristimo baš pretjerano pojam priušljivog stanovanja, nekako se on više stopio sa poticajnom stanogradnjom, odnosno stanovima koje je gradio APN, gdje se u stvari ciljana skupina su ovdje mlade obitelji koje kupuju svoju prvu nekretninu i po cijenama koje su, dakle, niže od cijena na tržištu. Međutim, što je razlika u odnosu na druge zemlje je to što mi u Hrvatskoj nemamo stanove za najam, nego su više stanovi fokusirani, dakle, na isključivo prodaju. To je bilo ukratko o pojmovima, dakle, socijalno stanovanje i priušljivo stanovanje. Što se tiče mjera koje su definirane, odnosno koje smo predložili akcijskim planom, se, dakle, tiču unapređenja politika socijalnog stanovanja u Hrvatskoj, posebice višerazinskim upravljanjem, gdje lokalne, regionalne i nacionalne vlasti sudjeluju u postizanju definiranih ciljeva. Prva naša mjera se tiče unapređenja programa za energetsku obnovu obiteljskih kuća. Zašto obiteljskih kuća? Pa u stvari često je situacija da lokalne vlasti u Hrvatskoj su vlasnici obiteljskih kuća na način da starija populacija koja je često nije u mogućnosti održavati svoju obiteljsku kuću, da vlasništvo gradu ili općini ili županiji vlasništvo nad svojom nekretninom, a u zamjenu za to ulaze u jedan od socijalnih stanova grada. Tu u stvari dolazi do problema jer lokalna vlast se ne može prijaviti niti na jedan javni poziv za energetsku obnovu obiteljskih kuća, pošto ovdje ulaze samo privatne osobe, te su oni u ovom dijelu isključeni. Naš u stvari plan, odnosno naša ideja je bila da se dodatni kriteriji uključuju, dakle, u program za energetsku obnovu obiteljskih kuća kako bi u stvari i lokalne vlasti mogle obnoviti svoje kuće namijenjene socijalnom stanovanju. Slično je i sa programom za energetsku obnovu višestambenih zgrada. U stvari činjenica je da u Hrvatskoj rijetko gdje, ako i u stvari čak i ne postoje, možda rijetki koji slučajevi da postoji socijalna zgrada. Najčešće su to socijalni stanovi koji su raštrkani po nesocijalnim zgradama i zato u stvari dolazi najčešće i do, kako je i Shinan spomenula u svojoj prezentaciji, do izolacije tih stanara od strane drugih stanara zgrade, čak i od cjelokupnog grada i tako dalje. Tako da u stvari naša ideja ovdje bila da se, ajmo reći, prioritiziraju stambene zgrade koje imaju u sebi socijalne stanove kako bi se i stanari koji žive u socijalnim stanovima malo više uključili u društvo, odnosno da bi ih društvo lakše prihvatilo na način da ih malo, ajmo reći, pogurnu, da su na listi prioriteta prilikom prijave na natječaj, odnosno na javni poziv za energetsku obnovu višestambenih zgrada. I zadnja prezentacija koja se tiče razvoja jednog novog instrumenta politika koji će se ticati koji će biti isključivo socijalnog karaktera, bilo da se radi o energetskoj obnovi postojećeg stambenog sektora ili izgradnje novih zgrada. I ovdje se također volimo dotaknuti i toga da se i zgrade koje će se graditi poticajnom stanogradnjom, da se i osim što se daju u prodaju, da se daju i u najam, kako bi se u stvari više približili ovom europskom načinu gdje je jako puno stanova, u stvari vidjeli smo i na Rajanovom grafu da je jako puno stanova u Europi nije u vlasništvu privatnih osoba, nego u vlasništvu gradova, pa eto, to je bila jedna naša ideja. I na kraju, samo da zaključimo, dakle u Hrvatskoj je socijalno stanovanje više-manje fokusirano samo na pomoć najranjivijim skupinama društva, a poticajna stanogradnja, odnosno priuštivo stanovanje, se više fokusira, dakle, na prodaju tih stanova nego na njihovo rentanje, odnosno na njihovo davanje u najam. Te se prema tome i naša treća mjera odnosi, dakle, na ljude, odnosno na obitelji koje ne ulaze u kategoriju najranjivijih skupina, međutim i dalje nisu mogućnosti plaćati bilo najam, bilo kupiti stan prema cijenama koje su na tržištu. Eto, to je ukratko to u situaciji što se tiče Hrvatske. Ukoliko imate bilo kakvih pitanja, eto, možemo krenuti s tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shinan. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Petra, on interesting presentations. Now, I will ask my colleagues to take an opportunity and answer the question. So, just turn your microphone and you may ask. Anna, please.
Hey, first of all, I would like to say hello to everybody and thank you for a nice presentation. They are very helpful. I will ask you some questions or some advice for us to conclude in our strategy. In Split, we have a very big problem with rising housing prices, which is connected with tourism activity. I don't know, do you have some experience with such kind of the problems in some your cities where you live or you made research? Because the local people are moving from the areas of the city which are touristic attractive to less attractive areas, and during the winter we have a large problem of empty city, that the historical part and this part near the sea is starting to be empty because they're not tourists, and the residential houses and flats are turned to touristic short-term rental. I don't know, do you have
I wish I had some better answers for you than what I will have. But I mean, Shinan's project has touched quite a bit on the income disparities between different municipalities in Greater Stockholm, and the high share of ethnic populations in some of these areas. It's, in fact, if you go down to the sub-municipal level, it's much worse than that. We have communities that are, community constellations of 10, 12, 15,000 people, where the percentage of the ethnic minorities is well over 99%, well over 99.5%. So we have a huge segregation problem that we are dealing with, and very much of that does relate to the issue of affordability. Because they were homes, these sort of Eastern European housing blocks that were built in the 1960s and 1970s. So we have the challenge, although it's different from you with the tourism sector, of the built environment and the larger territorial perspective having a major implication on the settlement structure. Regarding tourism, this challenge that you have is a phenomenon that is felt in many cities facing this dominant tourism sector. I know, for instance, in Malaga in Spain, they have a huge problem where the city center is complete. The households and apartments are completely rented out through Airbnb and other sorts of private rental forums for use, and then during the winter they are empty. In a Nordic context, we have the closest thing that we have to that is certainly, I would say, Shinan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say it's Reykjavik in Iceland, where the city center, because of the huge growth of tourism in Iceland, in part because of their airport expansion, has created this challenge in which the city center is drained out of local population, replaced by Airbnb and other forms of rental. And then especially in the winter, you have this emptiness. So now I come to the part where I'm sorry, because these are very, very challenging issues to overcome, because you have the issue of the private sector, the homeowners, the property owners that are able to make far more income by doing it this way, but you have this incredible impact on society as a whole in terms of where people are living, their proximity to the city center, and even the quality of housing that they can achieve. I know that in Reykjavik, in order to mitigate this, they have placed some very significant restrictions now on the use of these forums like Airbnb and private rental options. That sounds good on paper, except ultimately tourism, I mean, I think tourism in Split municipality must be by far the largest contributor to the local economy, probably over, I don't know what, 50% of your gross product or whatever. What are the alternatives then if you implement measures like this? So I don't have very clear answers on how you solve this beyond sort of ideas with tightening of rental restrictions for these homes in the city center, or additional policies to govern that. But then there is ultimately the question of, okay, where are the people going to stay? Do you have the supply of accommodations to support the need to maintain the tourism sector? So it is this catch-22 and balancing act that has to be made. So I assume that this is going to be an important part or aspect of the development strategy that you will have going forward. So I could say to make some investigations to other cities that are facing similar challenges. I'm sure you already have already, but yeah, I don't have very concrete answers for you on potential solutions to this problem. It's very challenging.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Recording this question, I have also one more, because you said that you look at housing as a social space. I really like that word, social space. But how to protect that social space when you have free real estate market? For example, people which are investing in tourism, they can pay more for some property than the regular family which is living from a regular salary.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in Sweden, as I showed in one of the graphs, with the very high percentage of apartments that are rented out at below market value, that's not social housing. That's just our housing market. We have caps and limits on the amount to which building owners, so a private owner of a building, can only charge a certain amount of rent. It's not able to function strictly on a market basis. So the solution in Sweden, which owes to our history of having a social welfare model, is to simply not have a completely free real estate market. We don't have that, in fact. So that then becomes, of course, a challenge if you already have a completely free market of how to implement those types of solutions. I mean, there are solutions that can be incrementally implemented. For instance, establishing or increasing the minimum share of rental properties that have to be included within a property development. So that could be an option that is used in many cities around the world, and in fact, in all development projects in Stockholm, for instance. Even if you're developing a project in the private sector with private development companies, they have to meet a certain requirement that, say, 25% of the homes that they are building has to go to the market for rent, and our market for rent is below market value. You have additional, say in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm from, you have similar rules where you have a private development project. However, a certain percentage of those have to be considered affordable homes. So they have to be developed as rental homes and are rented below the market value. So there are these mechanisms. It becomes a question of the transferability to your local context and to what degree that would influence the demand for development as a whole. But those types of mechanisms to establish minimums on rental properties and below market value rental properties within the context of development projects. However, those development projects are generally rather large projects, dealing with the scale of in the scale of, say, 500 to 5,000 apartments or dwellings. I assume that's not the case in Split, where you're talking about development projects on anything like that scale. So that becomes a challenge in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just pasted some text in the chat function, just to I think at least in the Nordic countries, and I think in any other maybe countries, the housing market is divided into two sectors. So the general market, which allows for, competing for the apartment, it's without any state intervention. And then the second one is called the second one needs state support, and also this type of housing that is needs tested. It's for the vulnerable groups and for those who cannot afford the housing in the general market. So so I think this is a mechanism of the housing market that we have to be sure that we have the general market, and then we also have the market that it's a bit more protected and supported by the state.
Mm-hmm. Petra, there was a comment there was a note in the comments about this this public rental housing model in Zagreb. Are you aware of this model that has been developed there? And do you have any context from Koprivnica about the development of housing supply that meets these types of social standards or below market value costs?
We were aware about this this approach, but I don't have anybody from Koprivnica nor Varaždin who can help me more with this, really. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately. I mean, maybe I can ask. Maybe I can ask them. It's not a problem, but really, you got me now.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. Maybe I will do some researches, and I can let you know. But for now, at this moment, I don't have anyone who can say me anything more about this approach for other cities.
Josip, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but do you want to, is that your question, or do you want to say something in addition?
Well, that's actually the question. So I know that banks need to earn some money when they approve some loans. So how they were motivated to give zero interest loans? Were those just funds from the banks, or there were also some public funds?
Yeah, yeah. So, in English, we use the phrase, the devil is in the details. And so getting into the details of this, for instance, the preferential interest rate or preferential loans that are used, say, in the Credit scheme in Estonia, those can operate on two bases. They can have a certain interest rate below the market value. And then you also have these preferential loans in which they're preferential because they are giving money to housing associations or homeowners that they typically wouldn't give a loan to because their economic situation isn't good enough to typically receive that type of funding. So there's a few different things we're talking about here. In terms of the zero interest loans and then the preferential loans below the interest rate value, usually there is a situation where the public investment will be used to initiate the agreement with the banks. So you have some sort of public funds that are invested, and it creates a sort of revolving scheme where the banks are inspired to agree to this because those loans are either guaranteed by the policy program itself, or the initial funds coming from operational program funding are then installed into this financial scheme in order to create the fund that can also generate interest, but the interest goes to the interest-free component goes to the investor that's making an energy retrofit. So those are the kind of the typical ways in which you would initiate those processes. The key for the banks, because your question is extremely relevant, it's very difficult to get banks on board with these types of programs. So the key is to have them at a certain scale, have the policy program at a certain scale where it will roll out enough on a large enough scale, and to have this sort of guarantee mechanism in place to help offset the risk associated with giving out these preferential loans. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Anna, you have additional comments?
Okay, I have once more. Okay, in Split, we have almost no social housing. Everything is left to the free market, and that's a very large problem. So it's one of the ideas to create some kind of fund for some kind of social housing. Mm-hmm. How to collect the money for creating such a funds when the local budgets are now in crisis because of they are without no money because of crisis.
Mm-hmm. So I touched on I touched on a couple of ways in which this could be done. The first way is to utilize European funds to help support the development of these funds through operational programs. There's partners in the Social Green Project and in other Interreg projects in Spain. They're using operational program funds to develop these financial schemes in order to then roll out to the market. In fact, the next programming period, the grant-based scheme that I showed as an example in Estonia, that is using European funds to be delivered as grants to building owners. The European Union desperately wants to move away from using grant-based solutions into using financial instruments. And these financial instruments are anything that revolves around these revolving funds or the regeneration of the capital that I was describing. So it is entirely possible to use European funds matched with a small percent of national funding or regional funding, then to create these types of policy solutions or funding models that then can be delivered to the market. So that is the typical way. You pool from Europe, national or regional funds together into a fund that then goes out to the market in terms of interest-free loans, these preferential loans, these types of models where there is a repayment basically with the savings in energy cost. The second way is to utilize your utility companies, and that's what we're doing in our current project proposal. Is where, I mean, the energy efficiency obligation scheme, which I mentioned is the that is the model in which the Energy Efficiency Directive of the European Union, it's one of the key mechanisms to implement that. And the Energy Efficiency Obligation Scheme demands that utility companies that are providing energy to market, various forms of energy to market, transport sector, industry sector, housing sector, they are responsible for reducing their energy consumption by making their energy supply more efficiently distributed to the market, and they have to report on the savings that they make each year, and they have to pay a penalty if they do not meet their targets. My understanding is that Croatia's energy efficiency obligation scheme was more or less rolled out to the market, put into function at the end of 2019. So it is still in its infancy. It's really just getting started. But you now have this mechanism where utility companies in Croatia, on one hand, have to meet their goals and objectives, and on the other hand, they don't have the business competency and experience and capacities to actually develop the systems that they want to put in place. So there is a very good opportunity for these forms of collaboration between universities, municipalities, together with the utility companies, to generate these types of schemes that can, these types of policy and financing schemes, and I refer to them mainly in this case as ESCOs, energy service contracts, that they can then, you can deliver to the market, to the housing market, as a policy scheme that is directly including these utility companies. So the money itself for that comes out of the utility companies. They become the vehicle for the investment, because they have to make these investments in order to meet their obligations under the energy efficiency obligation scheme. Energy service contracts, on a very simple level, they work as follows. A utility company will go to an apartment building or a block of apartment buildings. They will do an assessment. They will determine what are the most cost-effective things that we can do to this building to either reduce energy consumption or produce energy locally. So it could be changing oil boilers to heat pumps. It could be adding solar photovoltaic panels to the roofs. It could be adding changing the windows to better insulation, any sort of green building measure. They then pay for that measure to be installed, and they get paid back by the reduced energy consumption and the savings that is taking place because of that energy consumption. At the end of the payback period, the building owner, whoever that is, whether it's the actual people living there or the building association, whatever it may be, they then own the retrofit, whatever has been done. So there isn't really, the investment comes from the utility company, and there is no profit maximizing within this scheme. It's simply paying back the cost of investment and then carry on. And the utility company benefits because they are then able to achieve cost savings. Very importantly, I believe this is in every country in Europe, but they are able to multiply the savings by 1.5 for any intervention they make in where there's conditions of energy poverty, including any form of social housing or low-income housing. So if they do this scheme in the housing sector, specifically targeted towards socially vulnerable households, they get 150% of the savings. And so that is an extra carrot in order to help inspire these types of schemes and these types of investments going towards the social housing sector. You're welcome.
Thank you. Maybe additional 1 or 2 minutes for the last question. Do we have a last question? Okay. So it seems they got all the information that they were asking for. So thank you, Shinan. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Petra, on outstanding presentation and interesting discussion. Exceptional webinars require more than just great presentation. They need valuable content and importantly, engaged participants. And we have it all today. So thank you very much and hope that you will join us for our next webinar, maybe soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.